She ordered her predator to kill him, but it licked the human boot instead. The Meridian Sector pirates never saw it coming. Captain Finn crouched behind the twisted wreckage of their own cargo hauler, his hazel eyes scanning the tactical display projected directly into his visual cortex through the neural interface at his temple. Silas moved like liquid mercury through the shadows, the cyberwolf's chrome plating catching starlight as he flanked the remaining hostiles. Their bond hummed with shared purpose, no words needed, only the pure communion of thought and intention. 3 left, Finn's mind whispered to his companion, northeast corridor, behind the plasma containers. Silas's response came as a surge of predatory satisfaction. The wolf's enhanced sensors painted heat signatures through the bulkheads, his optical arrays cycling through spectrums invisible to human eyes. With fluid grace, he leaped onto a support beam, his chrome claws finding purchase in the metal with barely a whisper. Finn moved simultaneously, his assault rifle tracking smoothly as he advanced. The pirates broke cover exactly as predicted, scrambling toward their escape pods. Silas dropped from above onto the first, his massive weight driving the man to the deck. The second pirate spun, weapon raised, only to find Finn's rifle already centered on his chest. "Yield," Finn commanded, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had ended conflicts with words more often than weapons. The surviving pirates surrendered. Aboard the TS Vanguard, Finn's ship hummed with the efficient activity of a well-trained crew. He stood in his ready room, hands clasped behind his back, watching stars wheel past the viewport. The mission report was already filed, the pirates transferred to system security. Another successful operation, another small victory against the chaos that constantly threatened to tear the galaxy apart. The door chimed. "Enter," he called, not turning from the window. Technician Riley Martinez stepped inside, her auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow managed to look both professional and slightly rebellious. At 28, she was the youngest senior staff member, but her tactical analysis had saved more lives than Finn cared to count. Her expression was unusually grave. "Captain, we've received Priority 1 orders from High Command. Admiral Reeves wants to see you immediately via quantum link." Finn turned, noting the tension in her shoulders. "Classified?" "Beyond black, sir. The Admiral used authorization codes I've never seen before." The holographic projection of Admiral Sarah Reeves materialized in the center of the room, her weathered face etched with concern. She'd been Finn's mentor since his academy days, and he'd never seen her look this worried. "Captain," she began without preamble, "the Obsidian Hand has accelerated their timeline. Intelligence suggests they're planning something catastrophic within the next 72 hours, something that could shatter the Treaty of Andromeda." Finn felt ice form in his stomach. The treaty had maintained peace between the Terran Interstellar Force and the Alarian Ascendancy for 30 years. Without it, the galaxy would burn. "Your orders, Admiral?" "Joint operations. You're to rendezvous with Princess Xylia of the Alarian Ascendancy at Neutral Station Omega. She'll be your counterpart in this mission." Finn had heard whispers of the princess, a warrior of legendary skill and ruthless efficiency. The Alarians were a proud martial people who valued strength above all else. Their alliance with Terra was one of necessity, not friendship. "Understood, Admiral." "Finn," Reeves's voice softened slightly. "The princess has a reputation. She's brilliant, but she's also uncompromising. Try not to let personal conflicts interfere with the mission." The connection terminated, leaving Finn alone with his thoughts. Silas padded into the room, his enhanced senses detecting his master's elevated stress levels. The wolf's massive head nudged against Finn's hand, offering wordless comfort. "Looks like we're getting new partners, old friend," Finn murmured, scratching behind Silas's chrome-plated ears. Neutral Station Omega was a marvel of diplomatic architecture, a massive rotating cylinder that served as meeting ground for the galaxy's various powers. Finn waited in Conference Room 7, his dress uniform immaculate, Silas at his side. The wolf's optical sensors tracked every movement in the corridor beyond, ready for any threat. The doors slid open with a whisper of hydraulics. Princess Xylia entered like a force of nature. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Her silvery combat suit hugged her athletic frame, while her long white hair flowed like liquid moonlight. Her blue eyes held an inner fire that seemed to pierce straight through him, and her pointed ears marked her as nobility of the highest order. Behind her prowled the Vorlog, a creature that seemed to absorb light itself. The biopredator moved with terrifying grace, its obsidian fur rippling over muscles that could tear through battle armor. It was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Captain Finn, Zelia's voice was a commanding alto that carried the weight of generations of royal authority. Her gaze swept over him dismissively, then settled on Silas with obvious disdain. "So this is the human they've paired me with. And his pet!" The insult struck home, but Finn kept his expression neutral. "Princess Zelia, I'm honored to work with you." She stepped closer, her scent, cold metal and exotic flora, filling his senses. "Let me be clear, Captain. I don't need a partner. I need someone who won't interfere with my methods." "Our methods have been effective," Finn replied evenly. "Effective for humans, perhaps." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "We'll see how your cautious approach fares against real enemies." The Vorlog's eyes fixed on Silas, and Finn felt his companion's hackles rise. The two predators regarded each other across the room, one born of genetic engineering and brutal conditioning, the other enhanced by technology and bound by love. "The stakes are simple," Zelia continued. "We stop the obsidian hand or the galaxy burns. Try to keep up." She turned and swept from the room, the Vorlog flowing behind her like living shadow. Finn remained standing, processing the encounter. Riley's voice crackled through his comm implant. "Well, that looked fun. How'd it go, Captain?" "About as expected," Finn replied, watching through the viewport as Zelia's ship, sleek, predatory, and utterly alien, docked with the Vanguard. "This is going to be a long mission." The Vanguard's holobay could simulate any environment, from the crystalline caves of Proxima to the gas storms of Jupiter's moons. For their first joint exercise, Finn had programmed a scenario based on intelligence reports, a terrorist cell holding hostages in an abandoned mining complex. The simulation was brutally realistic, complete with civilians whose lives hung in the balance. Finn crouched behind simulated cover, his rifle tracking heat signatures through the smoke-filled corridors. Silas moved like a ghost through the shadows, his enhanced senses painting a three-dimensional map of the facility in their shared consciousness. The Wolf's optical arrays had identified 17 hostiles, scattered throughout the complex in defensive positions. "Patience," Finn projected to his companion. "Let them come to us." Through their neural link, he felt Silas's predatory satisfaction as the Wolf positioned himself at a crucial choke point. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Use the terrorists' own aggressive nature against them, funnel them into kill zones where superior firepower could end the threat with minimal risk to the hostages. Then Princess Zelia arrived like a silver comet. She dropped through a skylight that shouldn't have been accessible, her combat suit's adaptive camouflage shifting to match the environment. The Vorlag materialized beside her, literally, its bioengineered chromatophores having rendered it invisible until this moment. The creature was magnificent in its lethality, muscles coiled like loaded springs beneath its shadow-black fur. "Vorlag," Zelia's voice carried absolute authority. "Hunt." The biopredator exploded into motion with terrifying speed. It moved like liquid death, flowing through the maze of corridors with inhuman grace. Finn watched in horrified fascination as it tore through the first defensive position, its claws rending holographic terrorists with surgical precision. "Princess, wait!" Finn's voice cracked across the comm. "You're compromising the—" "I'm ending this," she replied, her tone brooking no argument. The Vorlog's rampage triggered every alarm in the facility. Finn's carefully orchestrated plan collapsed as the remaining terrorists abandoned their positions, converging on the new threat. Silas whined softly, a sound of frustration that echoed through their bond. Adapt, Finn commanded himself, his tactical mind racing. If stealth was no longer an option, they'd have to rely on superior firepower. He emerged from cover, his rifle speaking in controlled bursts. Each shot was precisely placed, conserving ammunition while maximizing effectiveness. Silas flanked left, his chrome claws finding purchase on the metal walls as he leaped between levels. Zelia fought like a force of nature, her plasma rifle carved through the air in graceful arcs, each bolt finding its target with deadly accuracy. She moved with the fluid precision of a dancer, her combat suit's servos amplifying her natural speed and strength. The Vorlag shadowed her every movement, protecting her flanks while hunting down fleeing enemies. The exercise ended in less than 4 minutes. Every terrorist was eliminated, every hostage saved. By any objective measure, it was a flawless victory. The debriefing room felt smaller with both of them in it. Finn stood at the tactical display, his jaw tight with controlled frustration. Zelia lounged in her chair with predatory grace, her blue eyes glittering with satisfaction. 17 targets eliminated, she said, her voice carrying a note of triumph. 0 civilian casualties. Mission accomplished. Your approach was reckless, Finn replied, his voice leveled despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. You compromised our stealth advantage and nearly got those hostages killed. Nearly? Alia stood, her full height bringing her eyes level with his. They're all alive, Captain. Can you say the same about your methods? The space between them seemed to crackle with tension. Finn could smell her scent, that intoxicating mixture of cold metal and exotic flora that spoke of alien worlds and ancient bloodlines. Her proximity was unnerving, the heat of her body radiating through her combat suit. You fight like a coward, she accused, stepping closer, hiding in shadows, waiting for the perfect moment that may never come. While you hesitate, people die. And you fight like a berserker, Finn countered, refusing to back down. All aggression, no finesse. You leave yourself exposed, vulnerable. One lucky shot, and you're dead. Better to die fighting than to live cowering. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but the words carried the weight of absolute conviction. My people have conquered half the galaxy because we understand that strength is the only truth that matters. Strength without wisdom is just destruction. They stood facing each other, neither willing to yield ground. The air between them was electric, with antagonism and something else, something dangerous and primal that neither was ready to acknowledge. Zelia's hand moved to rest on her sidearm, the gesture casual but unmistakably threatening. Perhaps you'd like to test that theory personally, Captain? For a moment, Finn considered it. The challenge in her eyes, the way her lips curved in a predatory smile, it would be so easy to let the tension explode into violence. But discipline held him back, the iron self-control that had kept him alive through a dozen campaigns. This isn't about us, he said finally. It's about the mission. Everything is about us, Zelia replied, her voice carrying an odd note of certainty. Your people, my people, we're locked in an eternal dance of power and submission. The strong rule, the weak serve, it's the natural order. And which one do you think I am? Her smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a shade too sharp. I suppose we'll find out. She brushed past him as she left the room, her shoulder making deliberate contact with his. The touch sent an electric shock through his system, part aggression, part something far more dangerous. Behind them, forgotten in the corner of the room, Silas and the Vorlag watched their masters with intelligent eyes. The wolf's optical sensors tracked stress indicators, elevated heart rates, increased skin conductivity, dilated pupils. The biopredator's nostrils flared, scenting the complex chemical cocktail of human and Alarian pheromones. Both creatures recognized what their masters refused to acknowledge. This was about far more than tactics or philosophy. This was about 2 apex predators testing each other's limits, circling each other in a dance as old as time itself. The mission to stop the Obsidian Hand had become something else entirely, a collision course between 2 irresistible forces, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. The planet Cygnus X1 was a monument to decadence, a world where the galaxy's elite gathered to indulge in pleasures that would bankrupt entire star systems. The capital city of Luxuria sprawled across the continent in a maze of crystal towers and floating gardens, its spires reaching toward the stars like grasping fingers. Tonight, the Grand Celestial Casino hosted the social event of the season, the Centennial Gala, where the richest and most powerful beings in known space gathered to see and be seen. Finn adjusted his silk cravat for the 3rd time, his reflection in the mirror barely recognizable. The master tailors of Luxuria had transformed him from a military officer into something else entirely, a sophisticated merchant prince whose wealth came from rare element trading in the Outer Rim. The midnight blue formal wear fit him like a second skin, accentuating the lean strength of his frame while concealing the combat knife at his ankle and the neural disruptor disguised as a cufflink. "You clean up well for a soldier," Zelia's voice came from behind him, carrying an odd note of approval. He turned, and the words died in his throat. She stood in the doorway of the adjoining suite, transformed into a vision that could stop traffic on a dozen worlds. Her gown was deep crimson silk that seemed to flow like liquid fire, cut to showcase her athletic figure while maintaining an air of regal elegance. Her white hair was arranged in an intricate style that framed her face perfectly, while her blue eyes sparkled with predatory intelligence. "You're staring," she observed, her lips curving in a satisfied smile. "Our cover story," Finn managed, his voice slightly hoarse. "Marcus Voss, independent trader specializing in rare minerals. You're my companion and bodyguard, Elena Thorne." Companion. She stepped closer, her scent, that intoxicating mixture of metal and exotic flora, filling his senses. How intimate. The shuttle ride to the casino was torture. They sat side by side in the plush compartment, their thighs touching despite the generous seating. Zelia had insisted on reviewing their cover identities one final time, her voice a low purr as she recited the fictional details of their relationship. "We've been together for 3 years," she said, her fingers tracing patterns on his knee. "Met on Kepler Station during a rare metal auction. You were immediately smitten by my protective instincts." "And you were attracted to my business acumen," Finn replied, trying to ignore the way her touch sent electricity through his nervous system. "Among other things." Her smile was pure predator. "We should practice looking comfortable together for the mission." The Grand Celestial Casino was a temple to excess, its vaulted ceilings decorated with holographic constellations that shifted and danced in impossible patterns. Beings from across the galaxy mingled on the main floor. Terran industrialists, Alarian nobles, Zentaran merchants, and a dozen other species that Finn couldn't immediately identify. Their target was Draven Vex, a corpulent Hutt descendant whose vast wealth came from arms dealing and information brokering. Intelligence suggested he was the primary financier for the Obsidian Hand, using his legitimate business empire to launder credits and purchase equipment. The tracking device Riley had designed was the size of a grain of rice, nearly undetectable once planted. "There," Zelia murmured, her breath warm against his ear, "by the quantum roulette table." Vex was exactly as his file suggested. A massive slug-like being whose ornate robes couldn't quite disguise his grotesque proportions. He was surrounded by a retinue of guards and hangers-on, all competing for his attention. "We need to get close," Finn said, his lips barely moving. "Dancing couples have access to the VIP areas." Then we dance. The orchestra struck up a Valerian waltz, its haunting melody filling the air with romantic promise. Zelia moved into his arms with fluid grace, her hand settling on his shoulder, while his found the small of her back. The silk of her gown was warm beneath his palm, and he could feel the subtle strength of her muscles as she moved. "You're a better dancer than I expected," she admitted as they swayed together. "Military academy. They teach you to be a gentleman before they teach you to be a soldier." How civilized. They moved across the floor with growing confidence, their bodies finding a rhythm that transcended mere technique. Finn found himself lost in the blue depths of her eyes, while she seemed hypnotized by the quiet strength in his movements. Other couples gave them space, unconsciously recognizing the predatory grace of two apex beings in perfect harmony. "Vex is moving toward the private gaming rooms," Zelia whispered, her lips brushing his ear. "We need to follow." The VIP section was a maze of intimate alcoves and private gaming tables, where the galaxy's elite played for stakes that could buy entire worlds. Finn's merchant persona bought them access, while Zilia's presence as his bodyguard explained her constant vigilance. They found Vex at a high-stakes sabacc table, his blubbery hands manipulating cards with surprising dexterity. The other players were a mix of species and professions. A Twi'lek shipping magnate, a human banker, and a Bothan information broker whose nervous twitching suggested he was in over his head. "Gentlemen," Vex's voice was a wet rasp that made Finn's skin crawl. "Room for one more?" "I don't gamble with credits I can't afford to lose," Finn replied, settling into the offered chair. Zelia positioned herself behind him, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. "Wise policy," Vex agreed, his tiny eyes studying them with predatory intelligence. "Though I find the most interesting games are those where the stakes are intangible." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in verbal fencing. Vex probed their cover story with subtle questions, while Finn deflected with the easy confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. Zelia played her part perfectly, the loyal bodyguard who watched everything and said nothing. When Vex excused himself to visit the refreshment station, Finn followed under the pretense of stretching his legs. The crowd provided perfect cover as he accidentally bumped into the arms dealer, Zelia's distraction allowing him to plant the tracking device in the folds of Vex's robes. "Clumsy of me," Finn apologized, steadying the massive alien with apparent concern. "Think nothing of it," Vex wheezed, his eyes never leaving Zelia's form. "Your companion is quite striking, a Larian." "Among other things," Finn replied, his voice carrying a note of possessive pride that wasn't entirely feigned. "Indeed, well, I should return to the game. Credits won't lose themselves." As Vex waddled away, Finn felt Zelia's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own. The gesture was supposed to be part of their cover, but the electricity that passed between them was entirely real. "Mission accomplished," she murmured, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The hard part's just beginning," Finn replied, but his words were lost as the orchestra struck up another waltz. Without conscious thought, they moved back onto the dance floor, their bodies fitting together as if they'd been dancing for years rather than hours. The rest of the gala faded into background noise. The laughter of the wealthy, the clink of crystal glasses, the whispered conversations of power brokers and criminals. "You're different than I expected," Zelia said, her voice so soft he almost missed it. "Different how?" "Stronger, more substantial." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, her carefully constructed facade slipped. "I thought humans were weak, soft." "We're tougher than we look." "Yes," she agreed, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "You are." The music swelled around them, and Finn found himself pulling her closer, their bodies pressed together in a way that had nothing to do with the mission and everything to do with the growing attraction between them. Her scent filled his senses, while her warmth seeped through his formal wear like liquid fire. "We should go," he said, his voice rough with barely controlled desire. "Yes," she agreed, but neither of them moved to leave the dance floor. They swayed together in the dim light of the casino, two predators recognizing something in each other that transcended species and loyalty. The mission was complete, the tracking device planted, but the real danger was just beginning. Because somewhere between the practiced deception and the intimate proximity, they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The attraction between them was no longer just physical. It was primal, dangerous, and completely beyond their control. The storm-racked moon of Kepler 442b hung in space like a bruised eye, its surface scarred by centuries of acid rain and electromagnetic fury. The target facility was built into the moon's largest crater, its biolab complex protected by layers of shielding that made orbital bombardment useless. Dr. Elena Voss, the captured scientist, was somewhere inside that maze of laboratories and detention cells, her knowledge of genetic warfare the key to stopping the Obsidian Hand's next phase. Finn crouched in the shadow of a twisted metal outcropping, his tactical display painting the facility's defenses in stark detail. Silas lay beside him, the cyberwolf's enhanced senses cutting through the electromagnetic interference that rendered most sensors useless. The facility's power grid was a weakness, 3 primary generators feeding a network of backup systems, all vulnerable to a coordinated strike. 17 guards on the perimeter, Finn murmured into his throat comm. Another dozen inside, based on heat signatures. We go in quiet, extract the target, and leave them wondering what happened. Agreed, came Commander Kale's voice from the northern approach. The scarred Alarian warrior had positioned himself and his strike team to cover the main entrance, his disciplined soldiers invisible against the rocky terrain. Zelia's response carried a note of impatience. The longer we wait, the more chance they have to kill her, or worse. The intelligence reports were disturbing. The Obsidian Hand had been conducting experiments on captured scientists using a combination of neural conditioning and genetic manipulation to create willing servants. If Dr. Voss was subjected to that process, her knowledge would be lost forever. Phase 1, Finn commanded. Silas Power Grid. The cyberwolf flowed across the broken landscape like liquid mercury, his chrome plating matte black with adaptive camouflage. Finn felt their bond hum with shared purpose as Silas approached the first generator, his enhanced claws interfacing with the control systems. Ready, came the wolf's mental whisper. Execute. The facility's lights flickered as the primary generators went offline, emergency power kicking in with a low hum. Finn moved immediately, his assault rifle tracking through the gathering shadows as he approached the main entrance. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Use the confusion to penetrate the outer defenses, locate Dr. Voss, and extract her before the enemy could mount an effective response. Then Princess Zelia decided to improvise. Instead of waiting for the coordinated breach, she appeared at the facility's eastern wall with the Vorlog at her side. The biopredator's claws glowed with superheated plasma as it began tearing through the reinforced concrete, its enhanced biology allowing it to generate temperatures that could melt battle armor. Princess, what are you doing? Finn's voice cracked across the comm. That's not the entry point. It is now, she replied, her voice tight with barely controlled aggression. Every second we delay increases the risk to the target. The Vorlag's breach triggered every alarm in the facility. Klaxons wailed as emergency lighting bathed the complex in hellish red, while automated defenses swiveled to track the new threat. Finn's carefully orchestrated infiltration became a running gunfight as guards poured from hidden positions. Kale, execute breach now, Finn commanded, abandoning stealth for speed. The Alarian commander's charges blew the main entrance in a shower of debris and flame. His warriors poured through the gap with disciplined precision, their plasma rifles carving through the defending guards. But the damage was done. The facility's security protocols were fully active, blast doors sealing critical sections, while automated systems began purging sensitive data. Finn fought his way through the maze of corridors, Silas at his side like a chrome-plated angel of death. The cyberwolf's enhanced senses guided them through the chaos, his optical arrays painting target indicators in their shared consciousness. But for every guard they eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The detention level was a nightmare of sterile white walls and humming machinery. Dr. Voss was in Cell 7, her emaciated form barely recognizable from her file photos. Finn's heart sank as he saw the neural interface crown clamped around her skull. They were too late. Status report. Zelia's voice came through the comm, strained with effort. Target located but compromised, Finn replied, his fingers flying over the cell's control panel. They've started the conditioning process. Then we extract her anyway. She's been neurally altered. The process is irreversible once it reaches. The explosion cut him off, a shaped charge detonating somewhere in the facility's upper levels. Through their tactical network, Finn saw the truth. Obsidian Hand operatives were destroying evidence, including any prisoners who might be recovered. All units, emergency extraction, Finn commanded, but he was already moving, Dr. Voss's unconscious form slung over his shoulder. The facility was collapsing around them, automated systems triggering a cascade of explosions designed to leave no evidence behind. Finn ran through smoke-filled corridors, his lungs burning as he fought his way toward the extraction point. Silas ranged ahead, his enhanced strength clearing debris from their path. They burst from the facility just as the final charges detonated, the biolab complex collapsing into a crater of twisted metal and flame. The shuttle was already waiting, its engines screaming as it lifted off into the stormy sky. But they were too late. Dr. Voss died during the flight back to the Vanguard, her body finally succumbing to the neural conditioning that had been slowly destroying her mind for weeks. The knowledge they'd hoped to recover died with her, along with any hope of understanding the Obsidian Hand's next move. Finn stared at the covered body in the shuttle's medical bay, his hands clenched into fists. They'd been so close. Another few hours and they might have saved her. Instead, they had nothing but a corpse and the bitter taste of failure. "Captain," Cale's voice was carefully neutral. The mission parameters were clear. Speed was essential. "Speed without precision is just chaos," Finn replied, his voice carrying an edge of controlled anger. Zelia sat across from him, her blue eyes reflecting the medical bay's harsh lighting. "You're blaming me." "I'm blaming the decision to abandon the plan. The plan was flawed, too cautious, too slow. The plan would have worked." "Would it?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Or would we have arrived to find an empty cell and a dead scientist?" The shuttle's engines changed pitch as they approached the Vanguard, but the sound was lost in the growing tension between the two officers. Finn could feel the weight of failure pressing down on him, while Zelia's frustration radiated from her like heat from a forge. "We'll never know," Finn said finally, "because we'll never have the chance to try again." The shuttle docked with a soft thud, but neither of them moved to leave. Dr. Voss's body lay between them like an accusation, a reminder that their inability to work together had cost an innocent life. "The mission continues," Zelia said, her voice carrying the iron authority of royal blood. "We adapt and overcome." "Some failures can't be overcome," Finn replied. "Some mistakes are permanent." They sat in silence as the shuttle's systems powered down, two predators who had discovered that their greatest enemy might be each other. The war against the Obsidian Hand was far from over, but the battle for control of their joint mission had just begun. The Vanguard's command deck had never felt smaller. Finn stood at the tactical display, his hands braced against the console's edge while streams of data flowed across the holographic interface. The mission reports were damning. Dr. Voss dead, the biolab destroyed, and the Obsidian Hand's genetic warfare program still a mystery. 3 days of analysis had yielded nothing but confirmation of their failure. The facility's data cores were completely purged, Technician Riley reported, her voice tight with frustration. "Whatever they were working on, it's gone." Finn nodded grimly. The intelligence value of the raid was essentially zero. They'd recovered some equipment fragments and a few low-level personnel files, but nothing that would help them understand the Obsidian Hand's next move. Dr. Voss's death had been meaningless, a waste of brilliant potential that cut deep into his conscience. "Sir," Riley continued, "Princess Zelia requests your presence in Conference Room Alpha. She says it's urgent." The way she said it made Finn's stomach tighten. He'd been avoiding the princess since their return, knowing that their post-mission debriefing would be a confrontation neither of them wanted. The failure on Kepler 442b had exposed the fundamental incompatibility of their approaches, turning what should have been a professional relationship into something personal and dangerous. "Tell her I'll be there in 10 minutes, he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Sir, she also requested that Commander Cale be present, along with the ship's senior staff." Finn straightened, his tactical mind immediately grasping the implications. This wasn't going to be a private conversation. It was going to be a formal review of command decisions with witnesses. In military terms, it was a challenge to his authority. Conference Room Alpha was the Vanguard's primary briefing space, large enough to accommodate the ship's senior officers and equipped with the latest holographic display technology. When Finn arrived, he found it arranged like a tribunal. Zelia sat at the head of the table, her silver combat suit gleaming under the harsh lights, while Commander Cale stood behind her like a silent guardian. The princess's white hair was pulled back in a severe military style, and her blue eyes burned with barely contained fury. Riley was present, along with the ship's other department heads, Chief Engineer Martinez, Medical Officer Dr. Park, and Security Chief Williams. They all looked uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to their captain and respect for their Alarian allies. "Captain," Zelia's voice could have cut through battle armor, "please be seated." Finn remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of military attention. "Princess, I understand you wanted to discuss the mission. I want to discuss your failure, she replied, her words hitting like physical blows. Your hesitation cost us everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Finn could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, his crew watching to see how he would respond to the accusation. Part of him wanted to defend himself, to explain how her impulsive assault had compromised the entire operation. But another part, the part that had been carrying the guilt of Dr. Voss's death, wondered if she was right. The mission parameters were clear. Cale spoke for the first time, his scarred face impassive. Speed was essential. Every moment of delay increased the risk to the target. We followed established protocols, Finn replied, his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. Reconnaissance, tactical assessment, coordinated breach. Standard procedure for hostage extraction. Standard procedure for cowards, Zelia snapped, rising from her chair with fluid grace. While you were plotting and planning, Dr. Voss was dying. While you were counting guards and mapping corridors, they were destroying evidence. While I was ensuring mission success, you were turning a surgical strike into a massacre. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zelia's eyes flashed with something dangerous, her hand moving unconsciously to rest on her sidearm. The gesture was subtle, but everyone in the room noticed it. A massacre? Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. I eliminated 17 enemy combatants with 0 friendly casualties. How is that a massacre? You compromised operational security, triggered facility-wide alerts, and gave the enemy time to execute their contingency plans. If we'd stuck to the original approach, Finn continued, his voice growing harder, Dr. Voss would still be alive. The facility would be intact. We'd have the intelligence we came for. Would we? Zelia stepped closer, her presence filling the room like a gathering storm. Or would we have found empty cells and wiped data cores? The Obsidian Hand isn't some ragtag terrorist organization. They're professionals. They were already destroying evidence when we arrived. Because you gave them the time to do it. The accusation exploded from Finn's lips before he could stop it, raw and angry and completely unprofessional. Around the table, his crew shifted uncomfortably, while Cale's hand moved to his weapon in a gesture of pure instinct. Enough. Zelia's voice cut through the tension like a plasma blade. You want to know what I think, Captain? I think you're afraid. Afraid of taking risks, afraid of making hard choices, afraid of accepting responsibility when your precious plans fail. And I think you're reckless. Finn shot back, his military discipline finally cracking. You treat every mission like a personal crusade, every enemy like a challenge to your honor. People die because you can't control your need to prove yourself. People die because weak leaders hesitate when they should act. She was close enough now that he could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes, could smell that intoxicating mixture of metal and exotic flora that seemed to follow her everywhere. The air between them crackled with tension, professional, personal, and something deeper that neither wanted to acknowledge. In my culture, Zelia continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, leadership is earned through strength. The strong command, the weak obey. It's simple, natural, honest. And in mine, Finn replied, his own voice barely controlled, leadership is earned through competence, through the trust of those you command, through the successful completion of objectives, through bringing your people home alive. Dr. Voss came home in a body bag. The words hit like a physical blow, and Finn felt something snap inside him. The guilt he'd been carrying since the mission, the professional frustration, the growing attraction he felt for this impossible woman, it all crystallized into pure incandescent rage. Get out, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Excuse me? Get out of my briefing room, get off my ship, this partnership is over. Xylia's laugh was like breaking crystal. You don't have the authority to dismiss me, Captain. I answer to the Ilarian High Command, not to some Terran bureaucrat who's afraid of his own shadow. Then maybe it's time to test that chain of command. The challenge hung in the air between them, formal and final. Around the table, the senior staff watched in horrified fascination as two of the galaxy's most elite warriors prepared to destroy each other over a mission that had already cost too much. You're making a mistake, Kale said quietly, his scarred face impassive. Princess Zelia is the finest warrior of her generation. To dismiss her capabilities because of one setback. One setback? Finn whirled on the Ilarian commander, his control finally snapping completely. She turned a surgical extraction into a frontal assault. She compromised operational security, cost us our primary objective, and got an innocent woman killed. In my book, that's not a setback. That's a catastrophe. In your book, Zelia's voice was pure ice. Everyone who doesn't follow your careful, cautious, cowardly methods is reckless. But tell me, Captain, how many battles have you won? How many enemies have you defeated? How many worlds have you saved with your precious protocols? More than you'd expect. Have you? Or have you just been lucky enough to face opponents who are even more afraid than you are? The insult struck home, and Finn felt his vision narrow to a red tunnel focused entirely on the woman standing before him. Every instinct screamed at him to accept the challenge, to prove his worth in the most direct way possible. But decades of military discipline held him back. Barely. "This conversation is over," he said, his voice carrying the finality of a closing airlock. "You have 2 hours to transfer to your own ship. After that, you're no longer welcome aboard the Vanguard." 2 hours? Zelia's smile was sharp as a blade. "You're more generous than I expected. Most cowards would have called security by now." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Captain, I actually believed you might be different. I thought beneath all that Terran caution, there might be a warrior worth respecting. I was wrong." The door hissed shut behind her, leaving Finn alone with his crew and the weight of his failure. Around the table, faces reflected a mixture of shock, confusion, and barely concealed concern. Riley was the first to speak. "Sir, was that wise?" "Probably not," Finn admitted, his anger already cooling into something closer to regret. "But it was necessary. The mission will continue. We'll track the Obsidian Hand's movements, identify their next target, and stop them, with or without Ilarian assistance." Dr. Park, the ship's medical officer, cleared his throat delicately. "Captain, if I may, the psychological profiles suggest that Princess Zelia's reaction to failure is extreme. Her culture places enormous emphasis on personal honor, and she may view this dismissal as a challenge to her fundamental identity." "What are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying that scorned Ilarian nobility have been known to do unpredictable things. Perhaps a more diplomatic approach would be seen as weakness," Finn interrupted. "No, we've drawn our line in the sand. Now we live with the consequences." But even as he spoke the words, Finn felt a nagging doubt. The attraction between them, the way she'd looked at him during the gala, the electricity that passed between them during their arguments. It was more than just professional friction. There was something deeper happening, something that made her dismissal feel like a betrayal of more than just military protocol. "Dismissed," he said, his voice carrying a weariness that seemed to age him years in seconds. "Resume normal duties, and prepare for the possibility that we're now operating without Ilarian support." The senior staff filed out, leaving Finn alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that he'd just made a terrible mistake. Through the viewport, he could see Zelia's ship, sleek, predatory, and utterly alien, preparing to undock. In a few hours, she would be gone, and with her any chance of stopping the Obsidian Hand before they struck again. Silas padded into the room, his enhanced senses detecting his master's emotional turmoil. The cyber wolf's massive head nudged against Finn's hand, offering wordless comfort. "I hope I know what I'm doing, old friend," Finn murmured, scratching behind the wolf's chrome-plated ears. But deep down, he suspected that he just lost more than a military ally. He'd lost something that might have been, should have been, much more important. The Vanguard's Predator Bay was a cathedral of chrome and shadow, its vaulted ceiling high enough to accommodate the ship's most dangerous passengers. Finn had designed it himself during the ship's construction, a space where Silas could run, hunt, and simply be the magnificent predator he was born to be. Now it felt like an arena, the perfect stage for the confrontation that had been building since their first meeting. Princess Zelia stood at the center of the bay, her silver combat suit gleaming under the overhead lights. The Vorlog crouched beside her, a living shadow that seemed to absorb illumination rather than reflect it. The biopredator's intelligent eyes tracked every movement, every gesture, cataloging threats with the patient efficiency of a born killer. "So this is where you keep your pet," Zelia said, her voice carrying a note of disdain as she gestured toward the various exercise equipment and enrichment devices scattered throughout the space. "Silas isn't a pet," Finn replied, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "He's a partner." "Partner?" Her laugh was like breaking glass. "You really believe that, don't you? That there's some mystical bond between you and this machine?" Silas emerged from the shadows, his chrome plating matte black with adaptive camouflage. The cyberwolf's optical sensors tracked between the two humans, his enhanced processors analyzing stress indicators, pheromone levels, and micro-expressions. Through their neural link, Finn felt his companion's confusion. Silas could sense the complex emotions flowing between his master and the Alarian princess, but couldn't understand why they were choosing conflict over cooperation. "The bond is real," Finn said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "We share thoughts, emotions, tactical awareness. He's saved my life dozens of times." "Because he's programmed to," Zelia countered, stepping closer. "Because his neural conditioning compels him to protect you. It's not loyalty, it's sophisticated slavery." "You're wrong." "Am I?" She gestured toward the Vorlog, which rose to its feet with liquid grace. "Watch and learn the difference between partnership and proper control." The biopredator was magnificent in its lethality, standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder with muscles that rippled beneath its shadow-black fur. Its eyes were pools of amber intelligence, fixed on its mistress with unwavering attention. Every line of its body spoke of barely contained violence, of a creature born for war and shaped by genetic manipulation into the perfect weapon. "Vorlag," Zelia's voice rang with crystalline authority, "hunt position." The creature flowed into a crouch, its claws extending as it prepared to strike. There was no hesitation, no question, only absolute obedience to its master's will. "You see?" Zelia's smile was triumphant. "This is how you control a weapon, not through sentiment or misplaced affection, but through dominance, through the understanding that there is only one will that matters." "And what happens when that will is wrong?" Finn asked, his voice deadly quiet. "It isn't, can't be. The strong command, the weak obey. It's the natural order." Finn felt something cold settle in his stomach, not fear, but a profound sadness for the woman standing before him. She was magnificent, intelligent, deadly, and utterly alone. The Vorlag wasn't her partner. It was her prisoner, bound by genetic conditioning and psychological manipulation into a loyalty that was indistinguishable from slavery. "You actually believe that," he said, his anger giving way to something deeper. "You think that crushing another being's will makes you stronger." "I think that understanding the reality of power makes me effective," she replied, her blue eyes blazing with conviction. "Your partnership is a comfortable delusion. When the moment comes, when you're faced with a choice between your life and his, you'll learn the truth. Which is that you're just another master with a more sophisticated leash." The accusation hit like a physical blow, and Finn felt Silas's confusion spike through their neural link. The cyberwolf could sense his master's pain, could feel the doubt that Zelia's words had planted in his mind. For a moment, the bond between them flickered with uncertainty. "Trust," Finn projected, his mental voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "Always trust." The response came as a surge of warm affection, pure and uncomplicated. Silas's love for his human was absolute, unmarred by doubt or calculation. It was the kind of devotion that could only come from choice, not compulsion. "You're wrong," Finn said, his voice gaining strength. "What we have isn't slavery. It's something you'll never understand." "Enlighten me." "It's friendship." Celia's laughter was harsh, bitter. "Friendship? Between a human and a machine? You've been reading too many romantic novels, Captain." "Have I then explained this?" Finn closed his eyes, opening his mind completely to the neural link. Through their connection, he felt Silas's curiosity, his concern, his unwavering loyalty. But more than that, he felt the wolf's own personality, proud, playful, fiercely protective of those he considered pack. The cyber wolf wasn't just obeying commands, He was making choices, forming opinions, experiencing emotions that were entirely his own. "Silas," Finn said, his voice carrying across the bay, "you're free to go. No commands, no compulsion. If you want to leave, I won't stop you." The cyberwolf tilted his head, his optical sensors cycling through different spectrums as he processed the offer. For a moment, he seemed to consider it, the possibility of freedom, of choosing his own path through the galaxy. Then he padded over to Finn, his massive head nudging against his master's hand in a gesture of pure affection. Back came the mental whisper, carrying with it images of their shared battles, their quiet moments together, the bond that had grown between them over years of partnership. Home. "You see," Finn said, his voice thick with emotion, "he chooses to stay, not because he has to, but because he wants to." Zelia stared at them, her expression unreadable. Clever programming, the illusion of choice makes the slavery more complete. "It's not an illusion." "Prove it." The challenge hung in the air between them, formal and final. Finn could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that their entire relationship, professional and personal, hung in the balance. Zelia was offering him a chance to demonstrate the truth of his beliefs, but the price of failure would be devastating. "How?" he asked. "Simple." Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried the weight of absolute authority. "Order your partner to attack me. If he truly chooses his own path, he'll refuse. If he's just another weapon, he'll obey." Finn's blood ran cold. "I won't do that." "Why not? Afraid of what you'll learn?" "Afraid of what I'll prove." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her intoxicating scent, could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. "Then let me demonstrate the difference between partnership and control." Zelia turned to face the Vorlag, her posture shifting into something regal and commanding. The biopredator's attention fixed on her immediately, its amber eyes reflecting the overhead lights like stars. "Vorlag," her voice carried the authority of generations of royal blood. "The human is a threat to our mission. He must be eliminated." The creature's muscles bunched, its claws extending as it prepared to strike. There was no hesitation, no question, only the absolute obedience of a weapon responding to its master's will. But Finn didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides, his expression calm. Through their neural link, he felt Silas's alarm, his companion's desperate desire to protect. But he also felt something else, a growing understanding of what was about to happen. "Easy, old friend," he murmured, his voice carrying across the bay. "Trust me." The Vorlag launched itself forward, a blur of shadow and muscle that crossed the distance in heartbeats. Its claws were extended, its fangs bared, every line of its body focused on the kill. It was magnificent and terrifying, the perfect expression of a Larian martial philosophy. And then at the last possible moment, it stopped. The biopredator landed inches from Finn, its claws extended but not striking. For a moment, it remained frozen in that position, its amber eyes locked on the human's face. Then, slowly, deliberately, it settled back on its haunches and let out a low, rumbling chuff. Zelia's face went white. "Vorlag, I gave you a direct order." The creature turned to look at her, its expression unreadable. Then it padded over to Finn, its massive head nudging against his hand in a gesture identical to Silas's greeting. "Impossible," Zelia whispered, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been panic. "You're conditioned to obey, genetically programmed for loyalty." The Vorlag's response was to lower its head, offering its neck to Finn in a gesture of submission that was unmistakably clear. The biopredator, bred for war, shaped by genetic manipulation, conditioned from birth to obey, had chosen to follow its own conscience rather than its master's will. "You see," Finn said, his voice gentle despite the magnitude of the moment. "Intelligence creates its own imperatives. Love, loyalty, honor, they can't be programmed, they can only be earned." Zelia stood frozen in the center of the bay, her world crumbling around her. Everything she'd believed about strength, about control, about the nature of power itself, it was all built on a lie. The Vorlag wasn't her weapon. It was a living being with its own will, its own capacity for choice. And it had chosen to reject everything she represented. The silence in the Predator Bay was deafening. Princess Zelia stood frozen, her silver combat suit gleaming under the harsh lights, while the Vorlag, her symbol of power, her genetic masterpiece, her perfect weapon, offered its submission to a human she'd dismissed as weak. The biopredator's amber eyes never left Finn's face, its massive form radiating a calm intelligence that seemed to mock everything she'd ever believed about the nature of control. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of a worldview collapsing. "You're mine, bred for me, shaped for me, conditioned from birth to serve the royal bloodline." The Vorlag's response was to lower its head further, exposing the vulnerable curve of its neck to Finn in a gesture that was unmistakably clear. The creature that had been engineered to be the ultimate expression of Alarian martial supremacy was choosing to serve a human captain who had shown it nothing but respect. "How?" Zilia's voice cracked with something that might have been desperation. "How did you turn my own weapon against me?" "I didn't turn anything," Finn replied, his voice gentle despite the magnitude of the moment. "I simply treated him as what he is, a living being with his own will, his own capacity for choice." "Him?" The word came out as a croak. "It's a weapon, a tool, a thing created to serve." "No," Finn said, reaching out to stroke the Vorlog's sleek head. "He's a person, different from us, shaped by forces we don't fully understand, but still a person, with thoughts, feelings, desires of his own." The biopredator's purr was like distant thunder, a sound of contentment that seemed to fill the entire bay. Beside him, Silas padded forward, his chrome plating reflecting the overhead lights as he approached his traditional enemy. The two predators, one born, one made, regarded each other with something approaching understanding. "This changes nothing," Zelia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The mission continues. The obsidian hand must be stopped." "Agreed," Finn nodded, "but the way we accomplish that mission has changed. No more domination, no more control. We work together as equals, or we don't work together at all." "Equals?" The word seemed to burn her throat. "You're human, weak, short-lived, bound by flesh and blood. I am Alarian nobility, bred for war, shaped by millennia of genetic perfection. And yet your perfect weapon chose to serve me." The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. Everything she'd been taught, everything she'd believed about the superiority of her people, the righteousness of their dominance, it was all crumbling before her eyes. The Vorlag's defection wasn't just a tactical setback, it was a philosophical catastrophe that struck at the very heart of her identity. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you choose him over me?" The Vorlag turned to look at her, its amber eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed almost human. For a moment, it seemed as if it might actually answer. Then it padded over to her, its massive head nudging against her hand in a gesture that was both affectionate and apologetic. "Because he sees us." The meaning was clear even without words, not as weapons or tools or symbols, but as who we really are. Celia's hands shook as she stroked the creature's fur, feeling the warmth of its body, the steady rhythm of its breathing. How long had it been since she'd really looked at the Vorlag? Not as a weapon or a status symbol, but as a living being with its own thoughts and feelings? "I don't understand," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I gave you everything, purpose, direction, a place in the universe. What more could you want?" The Vorlag's response was to nuzzle against her palm, its actions speaking louder than words. It didn't want to be given purpose. It wanted to choose its own. It didn't want direction. It wanted to find its own path. It didn't want a place in the universe. It wanted to create one. "Freedom," Finn said quietly. "The thing you've never been able to give because you've never had it yourself." "Freedom?" Zelia's laugh was bitter. "I'm a princess of the Alarian ascendancy. I command fleets, rule worlds, shape the destiny of entire species. How am I not free?" "When was the last time you made a choice that wasn't dictated by duty, honor, or tradition? When was the last time you did something simply because you wanted to?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered and unanswerable. Zelia's entire life had been choreographed from birth. Her education, her training, her career, even her choice of companion beast. Every decision had been made in service to the Alarian ideal of martial supremacy. "I am what I was born to be," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No," Finn replied, stepping closer. "You're what you were told to be. There's a difference." And what would you have me be? Yourself, whatever that means. The concept was so foreign, so impossible that Zelia almost laughed. Herself? She was a weapon shaped by genetic manipulation and lifelong conditioning to serve the Alarian war machine. Strip away the titles, the training, the cultural imperatives, and what was left? I don't know who that is, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Then maybe it's time to find out. The Vorlog chose that moment to stand, its massive form moving to position itself between them, not as a barrier, but as a bridge, a living connection between two beings who were struggling to understand each other across the vast gulf of their different worlds. The mission, Xylia said, grasping for something solid in the chaos of her changing worldview. The obsidian hand still threatens the galaxy. Yes, Finn agreed, but we face them together as partners, not as master and servant. Partners. She tested the word, finding it strange on her tongue. I don't know how to be a partner. Learn we both will. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of possibility hanging between them. Then Zilia's comm unit chimed with an urgent message. Her fingers moved automatically to activate it, and Commander Kale's scarred face appeared in the holographic display. Princess, his voice carried notes of urgency and confusion. We've intercepted Obsidian Hand communications. They're planning something massive, a coordinated strike against multiple targets throughout the sector. When? Zelia asked, her training reasserting itself despite the emotional turmoil. 6 hours, maybe less. Finn stepped forward, his tactical mind already processing the implications. Target list? Unknown. The communications are heavily encrypted, but the pattern suggests at least a dozen simultaneous attacks. Then we need to move, Xylia said, her voice regaining some of its old authority. All available ships, maximum speed to... No. Finn's voice cut through her orders like a blade. We don't have enough ships to cover all possible targets. We need intelligence, not firepower. Then what do you suggest? We follow your original plan. Find the source of the communications. Cut off the head of the snake. Xylia stared at him, her blue eyes wide with something that might have been hope. You're willing to trust my judgment? I'm willing to trust our judgment together. The word hung in the air between them, pregnant with possibility. For the first time in her life, Princess Zelia of the Alarian Ascendancy was being offered something she'd never had, an equal partnership with someone who saw her as more than just a weapon or a symbol. Together, she repeated, testing the sound of it. At their feet, the Vorlog and Silas settled into comfortable positions, their ancient enmity replaced by something approaching friendship. The biopredator's amber eyes reflected the overhead lights as it watched its former master struggle with concepts that had been foreign to her since birth. The strike teams will need coordination, Finn said, his voice carrying the authority of command. Simultaneous insertions, synchronized timing, perfect execution. Agreed, Zelia nodded, her tactical mind engaging with the problem. But the encryption... Riley's good with codes. Give her 12 hours and she can break anything the Obsidian Hand can create. We don't have 12 hours. Then we improvise, find another way in. They looked at each other across the bay, two predators who had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in dominance, but in cooperation. The mission ahead would test everything they'd learned about themselves and each other, but for the first time since their partnership began, they were facing it as equals. Partners, Zelia said again, the word carrying a weight of commitment that surprised them both. Partners, Finn agreed, and sealed the alliance with a nod that carried the weight of worlds. The Vanguard's tactical center hummed with controlled urgency as data streams cascaded across holographic displays. Riley's fingers flew over her console, her auburn hair escaping its regulation bun as she worked to decode the Obsidian Hand's communications. The captured transmissions were a maze of quantum encryption and misdirection, but patterns were beginning to emerge from the chaos. I've got partial decryption on 7 of the target vectors, she reported, her voice tight with concentration. The strikes are definitely coordinated. Same timing protocols, same abort codes. Finn leaned over her shoulder, studying the tactical display. The Obsidian Hand's plan was audacious in its scope. simultaneous attacks on military installations, government facilities, and civilian targets across 3 star systems. Each strike was designed to maximize psychological impact while minimizing the organization's exposure. Shadow broker Voss Darren's signature is all over this, he said, recognizing the tactical fingerprints. Distributed command structure, compartmentalized intelligence, redundant backup plans, he's learned from our previous encounters. Zelia stood at the center of the room, her silver combat suit gleaming under the harsh lights. The Vorlag lay at her feet, its amber eyes tracking the flow of information with predatory interest. Since their confrontation in the Predator Bay, something fundamental had changed in her posture. The rigid military bearing had softened into something more natural, more human. The pattern suggests a primary command node, she said, her voice carrying a note of analytical satisfaction, somewhere central to all the target vectors coordinating the entire operation. Agreed, Finn nodded. But where? The transmissions are being bounced through a dozen relay stations across the sector. Wait, Riley's voice cut through their discussion. I'm seeing something else. The encryption keys. They're not random. There's a generative pattern based on stellar cartography. She manipulated the display, highlighting specific star systems within the target zone. See? The keys are derived from gravitational constants, orbital mechanics, stellar radiation patterns. Whoever designed this system has extensive knowledge of local space. Finn felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. The Helix Nebula. It's the only gravitational anomaly massive enough to generate the kind of computational complexity needed for this encryption scheme. That's deep space, Zelia said, her tactical mind engaging with the problem. No habitable worlds, no strategic resources. Why would the Obsidian Hand establish a command post there? Because it's the last place anyone would look, Finn replied, and because the nebula's electromagnetic interference would mask their communications until they were ready to strike. The tactical display shifted, showing the swirling gases and exotic matter that made up the Helix Nebula. It was beautiful and deadly, a cosmic maelstrom that had claimed dozens of ships over the years. The gravitational eddies and radiation storms made navigation treacherous, while the exotic matter interfered with most forms of detection. There, Riley pointed to a small cluster of readings at the nebula's edge. Metallic signatures, consistent with a large space station, its position to take advantage of the gravitational lens effect, perfect for long-range communications. How long to get there? Zelia asked. 4 hours at maximum burn, Chief Engineer Martinez reported from his station. But that's cutting it close. We'd arrive with maybe 30 minutes to spare. 30 minutes to infiltrate an enemy stronghold, identify the command structure, and disable their communications, Finn mused. It's possible, but it would require perfect execution. And perfect cooperation, Zelia added, her blue eyes meeting his across the tactical display. The word hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of everything they'd learned about each other. Cooperation, not domination, not submission, but genuine partnership between equals. It was a concept that both of them were still learning to understand. The station's defenses will be formidable, Commander Kale spoke from his position near the communications console. Automated systems, patrol craft, possibly a full garrison. Then we don't fight them, Finn said, his mind already working through the tactical possibilities. We become them. Explain, Zelia demanded. The Obsidian Hand recruits from across the galaxy, humans, Alarians, Zentaurans, even some of the more exotic species. A mixed crew wouldn't attract attention, especially if they were carrying the right credentials. You're talking about infiltration, Zelia said, her voice carrying a note of approval. Deception rather than direct assault. The hardest part will be getting close enough to plant the infiltration team, Finn continued. The station's sensors will be sophisticated, and the nebula's interference works both ways. It'll mask our approach, but it'll also limit our ability to coordinate once we're inside. Then we go in together, Zelia said, her voice carrying absolute conviction. You, me, and our companions. Small team, maximum mobility, surgical precision. Agreed, but we'll need a distraction, something to draw their attention while we infiltrate the command center. Leave that to me, Kale interjected. I can stage a false flag operation on the far side of the nebula, make it look like a Terran patrol stumbled onto their position. That's dangerous, Zilia warned. If they identify you as Alarian... They won't, Kale's scarred face was impassive. I've run deep cover operations before. I can handle a few pirates and terrorists. Finn studied the tactical display, his mind working through the countless variables and contingencies. The plan was ambitious, requiring precise timing and flawless execution, but it was also elegant in its simplicity. Use the enemy's own paranoia against them, slip past their defenses while they were focused on external threats. What about the strike team? Zilia asked. Even if we disable their communications, the attack protocols may already be in motion. That's why we need to capture Shadow Broker Darren alive, Finn replied. He's the only one with the abort codes for all the simultaneous strikes. And if he won't cooperate, then we make him cooperate, whatever it takes. The words carried a weight of implication that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Finn had always operated within the boundaries of military law and ethical conduct, but the scale of the Obsidian Hand's plan changed the calculus. Thousands of innocent lives hung in the balance, and conventional methods might not be sufficient. I can be very persuasive, Zilia said, her voice carrying a note of predatory satisfaction. My people have techniques for extracting information that are effective. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Finn replied, but his tone suggested he was prepared for any eventuality. Riley looked up from her console, her face pale with concentration. I've isolated the command frequencies. If we can get within 100 meters of their primary communications array, I can upload a virus that will give us temporary control of their systems. How temporary? Zilia asked. Maybe 10 minutes, 15 if we're lucky. That's not much time, Finn observed. It's enough, Zilia replied, her voice carrying absolute confidence. Get me to their command center, and I'll extract the abort codes from Darren personally. And if he's not there, then we improvise together. The word carried echoes of their earlier conversation, the promise of partnership that had emerged from their mutual understanding. Finn nodded, recognizing the weight of the commitment they were making to each other. All stations, prepare for departure, he commanded. Maximum burn to the Helix Nebula. We have a galaxy to save. The Vanguard cut through the swirling gases of the Helix Nebula like a phantom, its adaptive camouflage shimmering to match the cosmic maelstrom. Inside the tactical center, the tension was a palpable hum. Finn stood with Zilia, their shoulders almost touching as they watched the glowing map of the Obsidian Hand's hidden station. Silas lay at Finn's feet, a silent chrome sentinel, while the Vorlag, now an unexpected ally, paced restlessly beside Zilia, its amber eyes reflecting the holographic light. Riley, status on the infiltration team, Finn's voice was a low command. Approaching insertion point, Riley reported, her fingers dancing over the console. Cloaking systems holding. Commander Kale's diversionary force is drawing fire on the far side of the nebula. They're biting hard. A small, grim smile touched Zelia's lips. Good, let them bleed for a ghost. The plan was audacious, a three-pronged assault. Kale's Alarian forces would create a loud, visible distraction, drawing the Obsidian Hand's main defensive fleet to the nebula's outer rim. Simultaneously, Finn and Zilia, along with Silas and the Vorlag, would use the nebula's electromagnetic interference to slip past the station's primary sensors in a heavily shielded shuttle. Their objective, the command center, to capture Shadow Broker Darren and secure the abort codes. The third prong, the Vanguard itself, would remain at a distance, ready to provide fire support or extraction if everything went to hell. Insertion in T-minus 60 seconds, Riley announced. Gravitational eddies are fluctuating. Hold steady, Captain. The shuttle jostled violently as it plunged deeper into the nebula, the hull groaning under unseen pressures. Finn glanced at Zilia. Her face was set, every inch the warrior princess, but he saw a flicker of something new in her eyes. Not fear, but a shared understanding of the stakes. Remember the protocols, he said, his voice quiet. No unnecessary engagements. Get to Darren, get the codes, and get out. And if he resists, her voice was a purr of barely contained violence. Then we persuade him, Finn replied, his gaze locking with hers, together. The shuttle jolted one last time, then settled into a smooth glide. "We're in," Riley's voice crackled. "You have 10 minutes before their internal sensors adjust to our signature." The ramp hissed down, revealing a sterile, dimly lit corridor. The station was a labyrinth of steel and humming conduits, eerily quiet save for the distant thrum of machinery. They moved with practiced efficiency, Finn and Silas flowing through the shadows, Xylia and the Vorlag moving with a primal grace that spoke of ancient hunting instincts. "Security Patrol, Sector Gamma 7, Silas projected, his mental image painting a clear picture of 3 armed guards converging on their position. "Vorlag, flank right," Xylia whispered, her hand gesturing. The biopredator melted into the darkness, a living shadow. The guards rounded the corner, their energy rifles sweeping the corridor. Before they could react, the Vorlag was among them, a blur of obsidian fur and lethal claws. There was a choked cry, a clatter of weapons, and then silence. No energy blasts, no alarms, just the efficient termination of threats. Xylia appeared, retrieving a data chip from one of the fallen guards. "Access codes for the command level," she said, holding it up. "Their security is predictable." They moved deeper into the station, a perfectly synchronized unit. Finn's cautious precision complemented Xylia's aggressive directness. Silas's enhanced senses provided real-time tactical updates, while the Vorlag's silent brutality ensured no enemy escaped to raise an alarm. Their combined strengths, once clashing, now wove together into an unstoppable force. They reached the command center, a massive, circular room dominated by a holographic galaxy map. Shadow Broker Darren, a corpulent figure in ornate robes, sat hunched over a console, his multiple eyes scanning the shifting data. 2 hulking armored guards stood at attention behind him. "Freeze, Darren," Finn commanded, his rifle leveled. The Hutt descendant slowly turned, a sneer twisting his blubbery features. "Captain Finn and the infamous Princess Xylia, you've come a long way for your foolish rescue attempt." "Where are the abort codes, Darren?" Xylia demanded, her plasma rifle humming softly. "Do you truly believe I would give them to you?" He chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. "The strikes are already in motion, thousands will die, and the Treaty of Andromeda will shatter. You are too late." "We're never too late," Finn countered, his gaze unwavering. "Not when innocent lives are at stake." "Vorlag, eliminate the guards," Xylia ordered, her voice sharp. The biopredator launched itself, a black missile against the armored figures. The fight was brutal and swift, the Vorlag's claws tearing through composite plating as the guards fired wild, ineffectual blasts. "Darren, the codes!" Finn pressed, advancing on the Shadow Broker. Darren's tiny eyes darted to a hidden panel on his console. Before he could react, Silas lunged, his chrome jaw clamping down on Darren's arm. The alien shrieked, dropping the data pad he had been reaching for. Xylia snatched the pad. "Encrypted, Riley, can you patch through to Darren's console remotely?" "Affirmative," Riley's voice responded instantly. "Uploading decryption protocols now. Stand by." Seconds stretched into an eternity. The distant rumble of battle from Kale's diversionary fleet echoed through the station. If Riley couldn't break the codes, thousands would die. "It's no use," Darren wheezed, his face pale with pain and fear. "The master key is tied to my biometrics. Only I can activate the abort sequence." Xylia looked at Finn, a silent question passing between them. He nodded. "Whatever it takes." She turned back to Darren, her eyes cold as Arctic ice. "You will activate the abort sequence, or I will ensure your death is memorable." The Shadow Broker stared back, defiance warring with terror. The Vorlag, having dispatched the guards, now stood silently beside Xylia, its amber eyes fixed on Darren. Silas, still gripping Darren's arm, bared his cyber